Now join us here on the podcast. My friend should be your friend, Jonathan Von Tobel. You can find him over on the Twitter machine at MeJPT. You can find him on VSiN. You can find him a lot of other places. You got a website. You got all kinds of things going on. You're on local radio in Las Vegas. I mean, what don't you do these days?
I guess be an attentive parent, right? I'm so busy. I'm so busy with everything else that my kid just goes by the wayside. No, that's about it. I play golf regularly. I have been wanting to play golf a little bit more, but now the sports are coming back. Who has time, right?
There's not going to be time to play golf, even though this is the best time of year in Las Vegas to play golf, because if you don't mind the heat, the courses are vacant. The courses are empty when it gets real hot, and you can just play. You can finish a round in like 2 hours. Like it's unbelievable. I always try to go in the heat of the day to make sure that no one's behind me, no one's in front of me. If I'm spraying shit all over the place, which I do as it is anyway, I'm not worried about hitting anyone. I love this time of year for golf.
Absolutely. I don't know, Matt Humans, he's been doing, I think the last like 3 weeks, he calls it his hot as hell golf tour, where he's just going to like the hottest locations around and just playing golf when nobody else is around. He's like a madman, but you're right. Like there's nobody ever out there. Even the driving ranges too, like are relatively empty too, if you want to just go around and hit some golf balls. So it's been great.
If you guys don't know, John is a big-time basketball bettor, knows more about the NBA than most people out there. Wanted to have him on as we get here closer to the restart. And Brett, I know you had something right off the bat that you wanted to kind of get into here.
Well, I guess I'm a futures guy. I love betting futures. I love finding value in futures because it's not easy to find. So that's always a nice, fun experiment for me. But before we get into that, I want to ask you, how do you prepare for this week? We are in unprecedented times with the NBA playing in a bubble. What are you looking for before you really dive into each game? Is like minute restrictions, any other roster quirks you're looking for, like games that matter versus games that don't, with the seeding games leading up to the playoffs? What are you looking for as part of your process this week?
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so fascinating, right? Like you're kind of alluding to, like almost everything from win totals, future seeding games are all subjective. It's how you view how these teams are going to handle these. But from at least my perspective, when I'm looking at it, I want to look at the teams that I know have something to play for, right? And that would include like all the teams that are fighting for the 8th seed in the Western Conference. That would include some of the teams in the Eastern Conference that want to improve their seeding, like a Miami Heat who want to get out of that side of the bracket, or the Milwaukee Bucks who want to move up a seed so they can avoid them in the second round and hopefully take them on to the Eastern Conference Finals if they can make it that far. So I think there's just a few teams that you can hang your hat on where you can go, I know what they're fighting for. I know what they want. And I know I'm going to get at least the best version of this team possible when it comes to playing. The thing that's tough about that, though, is a lot of those teams, as we kind of alluded to, are just teams that aren't very good. And so that's the tough part about it, is when you're looking at it from that perspective, like a Portland Trailblazers, for example, right? The Portland Trailblazers now laying 2 against the Memphis Grizzlies. These are 2 teams that I know are going to be fighting really hard because this is a very important game for both of them. So I think that's what I look at more. I look at the teams that I know what I'm going to get out of them. And I also look at teams who theoretically you look at their seeding potential and where they're at and what their potential opponents could be. And you realize that maybe this is what they want to do. This is where they want to go. And they might be trying a little bit harder. And that's the tough part about it, though, to go back to what I started with. It's just subjective because everything I think could be completely wrong outside of the 4 teams that are fighting for that 8th seed, you know? What
are you doing with the Wizards and the Nets? Teams that have things to play for, but I don't even know. What are these rosters? I mean, how do you analyze what these teams are going to look like? Because we're going to see players that we haven't seen play all season.
Yeah, so I think you can start with like the statistical profiles, right? Like you can look at the Washington Wizards without Bradley Beal on the floor. Cleaning the Glass does a great job of looking at that stuff. And it's actually funny. We actually just did the Washington Wizards on the show today talking about that because we're doing team profiles for every single one of these 22 teams in the bubble. And, it's funny because the Washington Wizards overall are just a bad team. But the thing that really sticks out, like with a guy like without Bradley Beal, is their defensive rating gets a little bit better, but their offense is what really falls off. Their offensive rating this season with Bradley Beal on the bench is 106.2. Like it's atrocious. He's such a big part of their offense. So I think that's kind of how you approach certain teams. I think the Wizards are better to handle that because it's really 2 key role players, Davis Bertans and Bradley Beal, who aren't going to be there, that you can get kind of a statistical sense of what that team is without them, right? A team like the Nets is something completely different because not only are 5 guys who regularly contribute minutes to that team not playing, but on top of that, you're adding new pieces to the equation like a Jamal Crawford, who we kind of know who he is when you look at the past, a guy who could score a lot but is not good defensively. And that's the tough part with the team about the Nets, because there's so many new aspects to what they are. You can't go back and rely on them. And the one thing I thought when we were talking about the Nets actually 2 weeks ago was maybe you go back to looking at where they are in terms of the frequency of where they take their shot attempts and how they play offensively, right? Because that's coaching, that's scheme, that's inherent. So a little bit of that thing, that's going to kind of carry over, right? Where they like to take their shots, how often they're in transition, how often they're in half court. I think things like that you can kind of rely on. And then you look at the pieces individually and go, okay, this guy thrives in this area of the floor, yada, yada. But at the same time, we're talking about the Brooklyn Nets and who wants to do that and break them down from that, like just really like get that into the minutia where you want to break that down. So I think that's where you start with Brooklyn. With Washington, you have a sense of how this team plays because you have non-bench minutes with the team that's really already together.
So as you just mentioned, you were digging into all these teams, getting team profiles done for every single team that's going to be playing. So as you were digging in, you had a lot of time to dig in to these teams and really and get some number. Was there anything that jumped off the page to you as you kind of dug in to these various teams and team profiles? Were you going along and you were like, that's interesting. Something I didn't really, I wasn't really following, I guess, as we were, going normally into the season.
Yeah, I think there was, so the one team that keeps kind of making me like perk up, at least in terms of like where their value's at with them and what their numbers suggest and everything. It's the New Orleans Pelicans, but it's not for what you think, because the Pelicans have really become like the team. I don't know if I'm using this phrase, like the team du jour, right? Like everybody loves the Pelicans. The value's all gone for them. And I always use this example. The Pelicans, at least here in Vegas, have the equivalent odds of the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are currently your 5 seed, right? And they're only outside looking in and have to force a play-in if they want to make it in. So it gives you an idea of how much the betting public and just the betting market overall respects the Pelicans. But Matt, to your question, like what's really actually stuck out to me is if you go back, because they've had Zion for 19 games, right? If you look at their 19 games with Zion Williamson, they are 10-9 straight up. They are 10-8-1 against the spread. But the team that they're competing directly with to win the 8th seed, the Sacramento Kings, in their last 20 games before the break was actually 13-7, and they also made a tangible change to their lineup, right? The Pelicans added Zion Williamson. The Sacramento Kings actually threw Bogdan Bogdanovic into the starting lineup and benched Buddy Hield. So what I find fascinating that kept coming up in my research was just from that standpoint, the Sacramento Kings, if you just took the teams away and you looked at their last 20 games and what they had done, the Sacramento Kings are actually kind of on par with a team like the New Orleans Pelicans, and yet the betting market has so much more respect for a team like the Pelicans. And the other thing that really stuck out was, it's funny, like Zion Williamson overall as an individual defender is not very good. Like if you watch him one-on-one, he has yet to really, obviously, because he's only played 19 games at the pro level, catch up on that side of the floor. But with him on the floor, their defensive numbers are absolutely ridiculous. If you look at cleaning the glass, when he's on the floor, their defensive rating improves by 9.6 points per 100 possessions. So it's kind of weird that you have this anomaly where Zion Williamson, by all accounts, is not a good defender, and yet the Pelicans' defense improves with him on the floor. Their offense falls off a little bit, but their defense gets much better. And you have to, and I think this is where it's important to watch games, you really have to pay attention to why that is. And like, is that actually something that's tangible, that's actually going to take effect? Or is just something we've seen over a small 19-game sample size that isn't really something you can hang your hat on,
So I'm looking at some of these teams hovering in the middle of the East and the West who get a bump on a neutral court. Teams that would have had to go to LA or Milwaukee in the conference semis and had that built-in disadvantage on the road. So a team like the 76ers now, currently in the 6th seed. Now they don't have to go to Boston or Miami in round 1. And this is a team that has been atrocious on the road this year. Plus now they get Ben Simmons back off the back injury. He's had 4 months to heal. Are the Sixers the team that has benefited most from the break and the bubble situation with the neutral court?
I think they definitely are near the top of the list. And Matt will tell you, so I bet at the beginning of the season, because I was really high on the Philadelphia 76ers in the summer and coming in, I bet them at 12-1, which is now an awful number considering how poorly they had been. But I have them at 12-1 to win the NBA title. And I've kind of been stubbornly sticking with that because you see the pieces that they have. And I think this benefits them tremendously for multiple reasons. One of them is, you kind of alluded to it there. I think a lot of people are asking the question, right, is this going to lend itself more to a home environment or a road environment when you're playing in a bubble like this? I tend to skew it's going to be closer to a home than it is to road because you're living there. You get to get in a routine. You stay at the same hotel. It is kind of like home because you're just doing the same things off the court over and over again. And you, like you said, you don't have to travel. So that's going to benefit the 76ers. Will they be as dominant as what were they at home, right? 29-2? Probably not. But they're going to be, I think, farther away from the road team that they were. But the other part of it is, I don't know how much you guys have been watching these scrimmages, and we have the 8 seeding games to handle this as well. The Philadelphia 76ers, which didn't make that many headlines, they changed their lineup, but not only just adding Shake Milton, they moved Ben Simmons to power forward. Ben Simmons isn't their point guard anymore. It's Shake Milton. And Brett Brown has come out and said that. Like, it's official. And so what changes for them now is, because you would think, well, still Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons on the floor together, that doesn't make much sense. But it does, because now Ben Simmons is not your primary ball handler. And now he's a guy who can rip rebounds, get in transition, still do what he does, but then he's not the floor's not clogging up as much with him at the top of the key and a center like Joel Embiid, who also likes to play along the perimeter as well. So I think that's a massive improvement for them too, because not only do they get to play in this environment where it's not true road games where they really struggled, but they also get these scrimmages and these 8 seeding games to work out a new lineup that they haven't played any minutes together, but theoretically should make a lot more sense. So I think Philly's definitely one of those teams. And I know you asked about mid-range teams, but I'll say I think the Clippers too really benefit from this for multiple reasons. Not only just getting bodies together and getting some continuity, because they were one of the teams that had practiced the fewest times throughout the regular season. But we know about once they finally take on the Lakers, right? If this was a regular season, even if they had the higher seed, those aren't Clipper home games. They're Laker home games. Now it's on a neutral in an empty arena. Like, this is so much more beneficial for the Clippers in that sense than it would be for any other team in the Western Conference. So I think those two teams immediately, the 76ers and the Clippers, are near the top of the list in terms of teams who benefit from this situation.
All right, so staying on the Clippers then. I mean, the Lakers are sewn into the 1 seed in the West, so now they face the Grizzlies or one of the other fringe teams out there. Just how much of an edge does that give the Lakers over the Clippers, who are going to see the Mavs or the Rockets or the Thunder or the Jazz in the first round?
Yeah, I think it helps them out a little bit. I will say this. I think, it's funny, when we were getting ready for the postseason, because we were approaching the home stretch, I was really interested in looking at the Lakers to win that series against the Grizzlies in the range of in either 4 games or 5 games. But they were going to be a really competitive 4 or 5 games because of what the Grizzlies do defensively. So I think if they get the Grizzlies, they're probably going to win in 4 or 5 games again. But it's not going to be one of these series that I think they're going to walk through and win by, double digits, because keep in mind, the Grizzlies, they took Taylor Gabriel's done a great job. They have a same defensive scheme as the Milwaukee Bucks, where they cut off the rim. They'll allow you to take 3-point shots, and the Lakers don't want that. The Lakers want to attack the rim, and they want to stay away as much as possible from 3-point shots because they don't have a team that can really shoot that well. And so I think from that sense, it's going to be a tougher series than we gather. But to your point, right, you do still have to take on the Dallas Mavericks if you're the Clippers, if it falls this way. But the Dallas Mavericks are one of these teams where offensively they're absolutely tremendous, right? They finished the regular season number 1 in offensive efficiency, but they're 17th in defensive efficiency. And when you get into some of the numbers in terms of their individual defenders, they're not very good, right? If you look at a guy like Luka Doncic, who's near the bottom half, if you look at defensive real plus minus at his position, once you get to the bench, guys like Seth Curry, guys like Hardaway, these are guys who aren't really good individual defenders. And so this is where I think the Clippers get a little bit of an advantage. They're a phenomenal defensive team, and you get to take on a very poor defensive team when you're actually top half of the league offense. So I think on paper, it seems like Dallas might be you'd rather have Memphis than Dallas, sure. But at the same time, I think they're just so poor defensively that the Clippers will be able to take advantage of it. And this will still be a series where they win win in 5, perhaps 6, because Luka Doncic has one of those transcendent games. But you also get the benefit of playing another series in between. So it's not like they'll have to play the Mavericks and then go straight to the Lakers if the seeding falls this way,
Our friends outside of Vegas that are listening and watching this will know the sports books out there coming back after quarantine going to be really competing for your business. So we were talking about the 76ers just a second ago over at FoxBet. You can get them at 22-1 to win the championship right now. They're doing a boost over there. So just again, if you're located outside of the Vegas area, be sure and shop these boosts that they're running out there, because there's going to be all kinds of promos and specials and things like that. We might as well take advantage of the best odds that are there. Now, John, one of the teams that I keep hearing, and I think this is just people want to write articles because it's been a long time, and hell, they've had 3 months to think about things, but it's the if they can get hot team, and it keeps coming up like the Nuggets, and people keep saying, oh, the Nuggets get hot, though. If they can just put it together for 3 weeks, and, the Nuggets this. Maybe it's just because the Nuggets burned me so much before quarantine with their inconsistent play and all that. But what's your feeling on this team? And do you think it's maybe people just trying to dig a little bit too deep into what could happen in this bubble?
Yeah, I think you're taking a little bit, but I also think the Nuggets have kind of been that team for a while, right? Like there's certain pieces where you look at Denver, you're like, wow, like there's a lot to like about this team. You know, obviously Nikola Jokic, the best player on that team. Jamal Murray at times looks like a burner scorer where he can like gather 20 points in the blink of an eye if he really wants to. And the bench was relatively deep at the start of the season, but they dipped into that at the trade deadline. My issue with the Nuggets is twofold. And a lot of it has to do with their offense because they're a slow-paced team that plays really good defense, right? But if you look at their offense, man, like the thing that turns me off with teams, when you're playing 2020 basketball, you don't want to be a team that's built around the mid-range. And there's certain teams that fit that profile. The Indiana Pacers love to shoot from the mid-range, and they're built their offense around the mid-range. The Denver Nuggets are another one of those teams. They rank 5th in terms of frequency of mid-range shots, like all of them, long mid-range, short mid-range. They love to shoot mid-range shots, and they're a top 10 teams in terms of percentage, and yet they're 15th in terms of three-point shooting. And if you look at things like transition offense, they're dead last in terms of points per play in transition. If you go over 100 possessions, it's 115.7, 30th in the NBA. And to me, you want to be, in today's NBA, you have to be able to run and get up and down the floor, and you have to be able to do more than just build your team around the mid-range because we know that the mid-range shot is dying up to this point. And look, they're 8th in terms of rim percentage in terms of what they shoot, but they're 20th in terms of frequency, so they're not a team that's going to press you and challenge you when you get to the rim, and I want that in a team. I want a team in today's NBA to be able to attack the rim, to draw fouls, shoot threes effectively and frequently, and also to be able to get out and run, and the Nuggets just aren't that. And once you get into a semifinal situation where you're taking on the Clippers, where you're taking on the Lakers, who are one of the best transition teams in the NBA, then you start to get up against it. And that's my issue with Denver. There's a lot to like about them, but for the most part, the way that they're built, it just really turns me off. And we've seen it a lot, man. Just go back to last year where you get Game 7 against a ho-hum Portland Trailblazers team, after, by the way, being forced through 7 games with the San Antonio Spurs, and you just go cold in terms of shooting because it's just not the team that you are. And we're talking about wide open shots, too, that they weren't hitting in that series last year. And to me, that's just what the issue has been for the Nuggets. When you're a team that's built around an inefficient shot, eventually that's going to come back to bite you mathematically. And we've seen it in the past. And I think I can't get over that myself when I'm looking at this overall when it comes to the Denver Nuggets, you know?
No, absolutely. So let's just get into it then here. I mean, we're not going to let you go without you making some picks. So, I mean, who's going to get to the finals and who eventually ends up taking the thing down?
So the Clippers are my pick out of the Western Conference. They have been. I've had them rated higher than the Lakers this entire season. Their bench is better. I think their starting 5 is better. Like, yes, you can make the argument, and the argument is very solid, that the combination of Anthony Davis and LeBron James is better than the combination of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. But at the same time, if you look at the teams as a whole, the Clippers are better. So I have the Clippers representing the Western Conference. It's hard not to pick Milwaukee, especially when I've been a guy who at the beginning of the season picked Philly to represent the East. But when you look at the East overall, with the Philadelphia 76ers struggles and the way Milwaukee matches up with so many of these other teams, I just find it hard not to see Milwaukee making it to the NBA Finals at this point, the way that all these teams are constructed. You know, I think a team like Philadelphia will still give them a lot of trouble because they're built to beat and handle a team like Milwaukee. I still think a team like Toronto is going to be a really intriguing matchup for Milwaukee as well because they love to get out in transition and run up and down the floor, and they'll be able to do that. But the issue with Toronto is that, of course, they don't have anybody like Kawhi to match up with Giannis. So I think overall, it's hard to not pick Milwaukee. So it's somewhat chalky, but Clippers and Bucks, for me, are going to be the finals representatives, and I do think that it's the Clippers who are going to win this overall. I think the Clippers are going to be your champions once we get done with the bubble in Orlando.
He is Jonathan Von Tobel. Catch him over on Sirius XM Channel 204. That is on VSiN every day of the week. Follow him on Twitter at MeJVT as well. John, thanks for the time today, man, and good luck with any of the bets that you have either already made or that you will make here over the next few weeks.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.